Chapter 6, The Card That's Been Dealt. The room was silent but filled with a strange sense of tension. Feeling that tension on his skin, Subaru moistened his parched lips with his tongue, grateful that arrangements for the first step of the scenario were in place. To Subaru, each and every face now present was absolutely indispensable. After all, he had no strength of his own. Lacking ability and manpower, all he could do by himself was to die in vain as he had done to that point. Now I can finally understand why you have gathered us here and delayed my supper. Crush Karsten, sitting on the sofa with her hands crossed atop her knees, broke the silence, murmuring with a look of understanding on her gallant face. Riai? To be honest, Fairy still has some doubts, meow. I mean, how does such a clumsy boy get that look in his eyes all of a sudden? With an expression as casual as his tone, Ferris kept his guard up as he gazed at Subaru. He was brimming with a willingness to defend his lord from any danger. In contrast to Ferris, Wilhelm kept his silence as he sat to Crush's left. Wearing his sword on his hip, the aged swordsman closed his eyes, with only his refined martial spirit hovering about him. There was no trace remaining of the warmth with which he had greeted them upon their return from the lower city. Now, he was wholly immersed in his role as a man wielding his sword for his master, Crush, rather than for himself. Subaru was meeting Crush and her retainers in the reception room of her residence, a place of which Subaru had few good memories. Twice in the past, he had endured bitter hardships there. He was meeting with Crush, Ferris, and Wilhelm. That much was the same as before. But there was something different this time. It feels somewhat uncomfortable to be back so soon after my first visit. I fully expect that Mr. Natsuki will say something to sweep away such misgivings. The blond man of delicate features, defined by his comical beard, commented with a chuckle. This was Russell Fellow, a representative of the Merchants Guild who possessed great influence in the royal capital. Subaru light-heartedly slumped a little at Russell's apparent diversion. Rem's calling one more person over right now, so please wait just a little longer. It isn't guaranteed my guest is coming, but it's a good bet. I await a prompt arrival. Incidentally, may I inquire as to your evidence for this good bet? Russell didn't even blink in the face of Subaru's presumptuous statement. Subaru's lips twisted as he faced off against a real merchant with a head, mouth, and tongue superior to his own. It's a simple story. The person I invited is sensitive to the smell of money, or so I heard them say personally. If that's true, there's no doubt. That was true for you as well, wasn't it, Russell? My, you certainly have me there. Russell put a hand to his forehead, seemingly indicating that Subaru had scored a point on him. Of course, even Subaru wasn't blithe enough to take the gesture at face value. He was well aware of the danger posed by the narrow tightrope he planned to walk. The rope was just about set to be tied on both ends. The crossing was yet to come. Subaru would do it, supported by the power of borrowed courage. A few minutes later, the door opened and a lone girl, Rem, appeared. I am sorry to have kept you all waiting. That's okay. Subaru brought up his right thumb with a wink as she walked to his side and leaned her face close to his ear. She said that she would be slightly delayed but that she would definitely come. That's so. All right, good work, Remington. With that, preparations for Subaru's tightrope performance were complete. Before arriving at the negotiating table, he'd prepared the argument he would use to move the deal in the direction he desired. Subaru's memories and experiences in this new world had led him to a single answer. Apparently, the last participant will arrive slightly late, but all the actors will be on the stage. No point waiting any further, should we start? Subaru's statement brought a change in the air and various reactions from others in the room. Crush made a thin smile, Ferris strongly pursed his lips. Wilhelm maintained his silence, his expression unchanging even then. Russell slowly sank into his chair. Seeing their reactions, Subaru took a deep breath and calmed his emotions. He could feel his own heart pounding rapidly. His blood circulated throughout his body. The deep anxiety simultaneously residing in his head made everything before his eyes seem to dim. But Rem, right beside Subaru, gently touched his sleeve in an effort to put him at ease. Subaru. She wasn't holding his hand, nor was she asserting her own existence. That little act of consideration was very Rem-like. The sense of relief enveloping him was as if 10,000 cavalry were riding to his aid. Rem was watching. He could not disappoint. Okay. Subaru hid his fears behind an impetuous smile and challenged the first wall. He needed to thread the eye of a needle, both to get to a happy end and to take one step closer to becoming a hero for the sake of the girl who believed in him, the girl who'd told him she liked him. Just as Subaru lifted his spirits and faced forward, Crush raised a finger and spoke. Subaru Natsuki, there is something I wish to confirm I would hear, from your own lips, the purpose of this gathering. As she sat, she raised a hand and rested her chin against it as her sagacious gaze landed on Subaru. Even though she knew full well the answer to her question, her posture showed no sign of softness that would allow Subaru to say so. Now that he had failed time and time again, he understood. The game was on before he had even spoken a single word. Of course, what I want is, so Subaru made a grandiose gesture, smiling powerfully to keep himself from being cowed by Crush's rapier-like gaze and repeating his earlier failures. A negotiation so that the Amelia camp and the Crush camp can become allies on equal terms. He thus began to challenge the first of many obstacles standing in his way. The exchange with Rem along Main Street had made Subaru decide to restart in a true sense. This was his sincere answer to Rem, who'd told Subaru she believed in him even after he'd bared everything inside his heart. Thanks to that, he gained a clear awareness of what he had to do. There's way too many walls I have to climb over to get there, huh? The sheer number of the obstacles standing in their way didn't change the fact that they were one move away from checkmate. Subaru scratched his head as if he was trying to put his thoughts in order. But I've still got to do something. Will you help me, Rem? Yes. If that is what you desire, Subaru, Rem readily nodded. Even after Subaru opened up to her, the same trust hovered in Rem's eyes as before. They lit two fires inside Subaru, courage and a sense of duty. Subaru no longer held any thought of hiding from Rem his own humiliation and panic at having his hands tied. After all, he'd half-bawled his eyes out while venting every complex he had. Rem, too, had revealed truths that had raged within her. In a true sense, Subaru and Rem were now friends for life. And because Subaru had set his heart on something, his head remained remarkably clear. First, let's double-check the time we have left. If we head back now, that'll be just under an hour, and then, as previously established, the time limit until the witch cult caused upheaval in the Mathers domain was 5 days, or rather, to be precise, they had a grace period of only 4.5 days. He also needed to consider the sealing of the highway during that time. In reality, he had only 2 days to prepare. And those 2 days are full of unavoidable problems to deal with. The number and nature of the barred gates they had to bust through put previous sets of loops to shame. Clearing any of them alone was hopeless. A fist large enough to smash through the lot of them was required. The first problem was, naturally, the witch cult. If they didn't stop the fanatics under Betelgeuse's command, there was no way to save anyone at the mansion, let alone the residents of the village. The second was, though the killer and means had been varied, Rem's certain death. Even if Rem went with Subaru, fate would invariably lead her to her death. The first time, she'd died far from where he could see. And he had been despondent when she was lost to him before his very eyes the second and third times. It was no exaggeration that the shock was what had driven Subaru down the path of giving up entirely. The third problem was that Amelia's death would trigger an indiscriminate rampage by Puck, the Great Spirit. Thinking back, Subaru deemed the possibility that Puck had been the cause of his death on all 3 loops to be very high. When he considered his icy demises from the first time around through the third, he was almost certain of it. All those walls were formidable, but all 3 had to be grappled with, or else the future world Subaru Natsuki wanted to live in would be lost. That would mean betraying the image of the hero who Rem believed in. Whole bunch of M. Subaru murmured under his breath, underlining the depth of the problem. Rem, watching Subaru as he sank into thought, made no reply to his murmur, nor had Subaru been looking for one. Subaru knew that she was simply waiting for the words that had to follow. She was waiting for the best judgment of how she might contribute greatest to the hero she loved the most. That was the present Rem's reason for existing and her ultimate means of expressing her love. With Rem silently watching him, Subaru used his limited time to search his memories for any clue, any way to break out of the trap of limited time. His head tied itself into knots. His mind was on fire. Neither his flesh, nor his abilities, could live up to those current ideals. Think. Remember. To not let his death the third time be in vain, to not let the will of the girl he'd let die the third time be lost in vain. Subaru's mind assembled everything that had happened during that third, finished world into one heavy pile. The people he'd met. The conversations he'd had. Partings. Encounters. Anger, madness, sadness, despair, recovery. And there's a possibility? Suddenly, something little more than a single option rose up in the back of his mind. Each of the threads was weak, so fragile that tying them together threatened to make them collectively snap. They seemed far too unreliable to rest his hopes upon. But he was all in. It was worth a shot. Remington. We need to talk. I have a few things I want to ask you. Yes? Subaru sought Rem's cooperation in drafting the plan that he'd only just thought of in his head. Now that Amelia's participating in the royal selection, it looks like the witch cult is gonna move. If they go after Amelia, there'll no doubt be harm to the mansion and the village. I want to stop that. The witch cult. A grave look came over Rem's eyes the instant she heard the words. But as Rem nodded at Subaru's words, her self-control held those emotions in check. Master Roswell also has concerns that the witch cult might make a move. Though I do not know the details, I believe that he has studied the matter and drawn up countermeasures. But that's not gonna be enough. In fact, Subaru didn't really know what countermeasures he'd taken against the witch cult. He didn't know if they hadn't been executed or if they had just proven ineffective. Either way, whatever pre-existing preparations Roswell had set weren't up to the task, and he knew that hell would come to pass without fail. Now that Subaru knew the future, he had to secure the power to protect the lives at the mansion and the village without relying on Roswell. I'm pretty sure the witch cult is gonna come in a quick, decisive battle. Rem, what does the mansion have to fight with? This is a difficult thing to tell you, but the possibility Master Roswell is absent from the mansion is quite high. He had planned to visit an important associate within his domain upon his return from the royal capital. Based on Rem's prevaricating reply, the situation was the same as last time. Roswell wasn't there. The only people at the mansion at present were Amelia, Ram, and Beatrice. Only 3 people, and one of them was Beatrice. He was deeply suspicious that the uncooperative girl would willingly engage the witch cult in battle. That made Subaru recall the exchange between Beatrice and him the last time around, if only a brief one. He remembered that he'd asked Beatrice to kill him. He remembered Beatrice's face, turning eyes toward him like that of a child whose hopes had been betrayed. Right now, I've gotta set that aside. Subaru somehow brushed off the girl's tearful gaze and faced Rem once more. So that leaves 2 people to fight. Even if you and I go back there, we'd just be 2 drops against a bucket. As the majority of the main residence's fighting strength rests with Master Roswell's personal abilities, I cannot deny it. If Frederica was still with us, it might be a different story, but Rem lowered her gaze as she ruefully invoked the name of a former co-worker at the mansion. Subaru patted her shoulder in consolation as he mentally filled the gaps in his own understanding. There was no point speaking any further of the mansion's available combat strength. Therefore, the next issue was the main one. Remington. Subaru sat up straight and stared at Remington. Then, as Rem, detecting that the atmosphere had changed, lifted her face and looked at him, he said, "Please tell me what Roswell ordered you to stay in the royal capital to do." Subaru thought her expression was dubious, or perhaps surprised that he had gone for an unguarded opening. However, Rem's reaction thoroughly defied Subaru's expectations. "Yes. As you wish, Subaru." Rem nodded to Subaru as a small smile came over her, as if she was happy from the bottom of her heart. A single tear rolled down from the corner of her eye. "An alliance, you say?" He was now in the reception room at the Crush residence. Crush murmured with all eyes falling upon Subaru as he answered her question concerning the goal of the meeting. She lowered her head, falling into thought briefly before shifting her gaze from Subaru to Remington. Rem quietly deduced the meaning of her probing gaze and slowly shook her head. In accordance with Master Roswell's instructions, I have proposed nothing. This is something Subaru arrived at by himself. I do not doubt your loyalty. However, I see, the face Crush made seemed to indicate that she understood, even if she did not exactly accept it. Then should I take this to mean the right to engage in these negotiations has shifted from Rem to you, Subaru Natsuki? Yeah, that's what it amounts to. Roswell was a real jerk with how roundabout he set this up, though. With an exaggerated sigh, Subaru expressed his personal thoughts as his clown-faced employer floated into the back of his mind. Secret orders concerning the royal capital had been kept from Subaru, handed down to Rem alone. Roswell had strictly instructed Rem not to reveal the details to Subaru so long as he did not realize that fact for himself. It's not like it wasn't bothering me a little from the start. In the first place, it's plain as day that our side is short on manpower. So he'd leave Rem in the capital without a set plan? Rem, the one from the mansion who'd be most missed? There's no way. I really should have realized that earlier. Of course, the cover story was that Roswell couldn't take responsibility for healing and repaying the man who'd saved his own domain from crisis without at least a single person to look after him. But I don't think that eccentric would let go of Rem for a humanitarian reason like that. When you think, there's gotta be something else going on, Crush recrossed her legs, picking up where Subaru left off to state her conclusion. So he naturally settled on her as the one who had the best opportunity for an audience with my house. Besides, I heard that Rem and Crush were having secret meetings every night. I hate myself for being an idiot and not considering what the discussions were about, though. He couldn't even manage a laugh for how he'd been unable to see beyond himself that whole time. After all, even though Rem had actually dropped plenty of hints to convey Roswell's secret intentions, it had taken him until the fourth time to look back and realize it. So every night you've been meeting about forming an alliance. I heard from Rem all about what my side's offering for the terms of the deal. The deal chiefly concerns magic crystals in the Great Elier Forest and the mining rights thereof. Just like that, Crush exposed what Subaru's words had only hinted at, seeing that there was nothing to hide. The instant the words reached the ears of the lone merchant present, his eyes glimmered. My, that is quite a fascinating tale. Russell, who had maintained his silence to that point, positively glowed. He sounded pleased now that the details finally concerned him in some way. When one considers how magical stone craftsmanship has advanced by leaps and bounds in recent years, magic crystal mining rights hold ever-increasing value. That goes all the more for virgin territory. Subaru could not conceal his surprise that the merchant had bid on the hook harder than expected. When he'd first heard about the mining rights from Rem, the fact that Crush had held out so far convinced Subaru that it wasn't all that attractive an offer. Does it really have enough value to put you in such a good mood, Russell? But of course. Magical stone craftsmanship thrives in the markets of Kararaji, and magic crystal craftsmen of my own nation have polished their talents over many years. Recently, their products can be seen here and there, even gracing the hands of the general public. These days, the more magic crystals the better. Until now, we have relied upon trade with Castico to the north for most of our supply, so I am overjoyed to learn of the existence of a rich local vein. Russell held up a finger and spoke with a buoyant tone as he answered. A magic crystal is composed of mana, it is pure crystallized magic. Their attributes are greatly influenced by the land of their origin and the skill of the craftsman who wrought them. In turn, the hand of a skilled craftsman can be applied to a variety of magic crystal crafts. If not mishandled, their intensity is excellent, lasting reliably for a period of several years. Surely it goes without saying that they make for very attractive merchandise. In contrast to Russell, listing all the good points adding to the value of magic crystals, Crush went on to coolly enumerate the parts that diminish their value. However, the craftsmen able to work magic stones are few in number. Once a magic stone has been wrought, it is unprofitable to redo the work. At present, many mines have been placed under the kingdom's management, with the majority of magic crystals being distributed for public works. Though you say some reach the general public, it represents only a fraction. Undaunted, Russell carried on. There are no untouched mining sites that are not immediately snapped up the moment they are found. There is a rich history of succeeding generations of the Marquis of Mathers tapping undiscovered veins to build a fortune. And we have the Knight of Lady Amelia, a candidate in the royal selection, to vouch for it. It is a trustworthy bet. Russell spoke in a fervent tone, slyly glancing at Subaru all the while. He had quite a rotten personality to know of Subaru's humiliation at the royal palace and still declare his word to be proof of anything. Nor did Subaru forget that dressing up the issue of mining rights in such a frivolous manner was meant to hold him in check. Russell was driving home for Subaru that this could not be unheard. Not that Subaru had the slightest intention of backing out to begin with. Yeah, I don't mind if you trust that. I don't think we're villains enough to bluff at the first people we team up with over the course of a long royal selection. Subaru could rest easy because Roswell had been the one to propose selling the mining rights. Russell seemed to recoil deliberately in response to Subaru's answer. I see. You would appear to have truly embraced the role of negotiator. I apologize for my rudeness in speaking as if I was testing you. Nah, it's fine. After all, I plan on using all the stuff you just said for all it's worth over the rest of the conversation. Subaru hadn't expected Russell to rate him highly to begin with. He'd correctly surmised that his ability would come into question and his measure would be taken then and there. He prepared a topic offering an easy avenue of attack, avoiding an assault on a far more pernicious front before broaching the main issue. He could not conceal his relief that the bait had been taken as intended. He put on meaninglessly grandiose airs of amiability to conceal the tension in his cheeks. Having said that, since he's apologized, I expect you to overlook one or two rude things I might say. So you seated Russell Fellow at the same table in hopes of this? You are an unexpectedly crafty man yourself. As Subaru flippantly commented, Crush smiled slightly and voiced her appraisal to end the exchange. The fact that she hadn't ended the discussion seemed to indicate she hadn't given him a failing grade. Even as he felt a cold sweat at having climbed over the first gate, Subaru maintained his friendly smile as he looked at Crush. Well, I also wanted an advisor, since this is talking about profits, but calling Russell here has to do with the main topic coming next. Really now? The main topic? Subaru continued, and the atmosphere inside the room grew tense once more. Crush, who had merely been humoring the conversation to that point, rectified her seating and quietly closed her eyes for a time. After that, she slowly opened her amber eyes, their gaze pierced Subaru like an arrow. Before its power, sufficient to bring to mind a cold, blowing wind, Subaru did not falter. The tightening of his mind served only to make him straighten his back and put his feelings in order as he faced her. Subaru Natsuki, I formally acknowledge you as the proxy of Marquis Roswell, and also as an envoy from Emilia, and whatever details you and I negotiate will also hold true between Emilia and me. All it took for her to overwhelm people was for her to face them head-on. Crush was not intentionally attempting to bowl Subaru over at that moment. All she'd done was switch mental gears from Crush, the private individual, to Crush Karsten, the public persona. Such was the power and presence of the current Duke of Karsten. This was what the valiant woman closest to the kingdom of Lagunica's throne really looked like. Subaru felt goosebumps rise as exclamation points danced inside his head. As he quietly shuddered, Crush extended a hand to him, firing the opening salvo to announce the start of the negotiations. I believe you have already heard, but I shall state it regardless. Rem and I were negotiating the sale of mining rights, but I have not accepted the offer. Though I imagine you already knew this? Yeah. On the one hand was Rem, visibly lamenting her own insufficient strength, on the other hand was Subaru, pathetically unable to look past himself to even notice what had caused her such anguish. Subaru would take those two laments and regrets and put them to good use to avoid future distress, and so that all his previous failures would not be in vain. I want to make sure of something myself. So the offer just isn't good enough as it stands? Each camp lays off the other, mining rights for the Great Elier Forest are sold to you, and you work out the fine details of what to do with the magic crystals themselves later? The draft proposal came from Rem's side. I suppose I should say, as to be expected of Marquis Roswell. On top of securing profit for his own camp, he offers just enough advantage so that my house might accept it. Normally, it is an offer one would never refuse. Such a proposal makes me want to have a written agreement prepared immediately, but Subaru couldn't speak in any informed manner about the arithmetic behind the deal. If he did clumsily say something, it could wind up being taken as, okay, take all the mining rights, then. In this case, what would follow such negotiations is the problem. Do you understand? It's not simply that, you don't trust Roswell? Subaru was of the opinion that if Roswell's conduct was being questioned, he could rectify that by behaving with absolute propriety henceforth, but that wasn't Crush's problem with it. Making a deal with Amelia would mean an agreement with a rival royal selection candidate. Furthermore, one slandered as a half-demon. If one considers the consequences, caution is inevitable. Subaru was unexpectedly discouraged to hear Crush quietly speak such words. The image he had of Crush was of someone so steadfast, the words majestic and sincere suited her. She had been the living incarnation of those things when stating her convictions at the Royal Selection Conference. It was precisely because he had heard her address that made her acting as if she cared about rumors seem so odd. Don't tell me this is merely a justification for saying no? Sabawo? Fairy thinks that is really not the sort of thing you should say during an important negotiation? Ferris had held his silence since the start of negotiations, but Subaru's careless remark brought anger to his smile. A vein on his forehead was bulging as Subaru quickly covered his mouth and lowered his head. Goodness, this puts me in a bit of a bind. As he did so, Crush, watching the exchange, loosened the corners of her lips very slightly. It is I who was embarrassed to have my justification exposed so bluntly. I shall learn from this. The opportunity does not often arise. With convoluted logic, she overlooked Subaru's present rudeness. That said, being saved by the awkwardness of his opponent's position put him in a precarious place. So that is an excuse for. Then you don't really think that forming an alliance with Amelia is a terrible thing in and of itself? Subaru Natsuki, I shall correct one misconception. Crush raised a finger, pointing it towards Subaru. A person's worth is decided by how her soul lives and how it shines. A person's true nature is absolutely not determined by the circumstances of one's birth and where someone was raised. Of course, even Crush understood that they had an indirect influence. She did not lack the power of imagination to deduce how the senseless cruelties inflicted by Amelia's environment, simply because she was a half-elf, had strengthened her in the process. Her words at the royal selection site were not false. It is because I am certain of her pride and resolve that I acknowledge Amelia as a rival. Well, that's convoluted. In other words? Forgive me. I have a fondness for theatrics. Crush pursed her lips slightly, seemingly fully aware of just how grandiose her own statement was. A moment later, her expression tightened. I am not refusing an alliance with Amelia because she is a half-elf. From my perspective, Amelia, who is in no way politically opposed to me, is not someone I need to go out of my way to antagonize. I would even be willing to ally with her. Meaning that, do not be so hasty to reply, Subaru Natsuki. It is no exaggeration to say that what you utter, and how your words are interpreted, will determine the course of these events. Crush chided Subaru for assuming her reply was favorable as she threw the ball into his court once more. In other words, now that Subaru held the right to negotiate, she wanted to see what cards were in his hand. Mining rights for the Great Elier Forest would be highly advantageous for my side. On the other hand, it is a fact that there is no need for me to rush to get ahead in the royal selection. The period of time is 3 years. Too much haste to stir things up would sow the seeds for troubles down the road. So you're saying the advantages and disadvantages of forming an alliance with Amelia don't match up? Not precisely. At present, the advantages and disadvantages cancel each other out. By my house's thinking, we require convincing, a push for us to take that one final step. Crush seemed personally in favor of the idea of forming an alliance. On the other hand, a noble house was apparently too large to be swayed purely by Crush's private opinion on the matter. Hence, she sought something from Subaru, something that would silence the voices around her urging her not to stir things up. When Subaru tried to speak, he was a little surprised at how his own throat seemed to be blocked. The tension and anxiety welling up in his chest blocked his throat just as he was on the verge of stepping forward. From here on would be completely ad-libbed in a way he had never before experienced. He hadn't checked it with anyone. It was possible he was reading this wrong. But Crush would probably bite. Yes. Subaru believed in his own idea. To form an alliance, we're offering mining rights and information. Information? When she heard the word, Crush stroked her own long hair as she prompted him to continue. She hadn't decided yet. Now came the hard part. Yeah, that's right. I'm offering a certain piece of information with it. Then I would hear it. Will these words from your lips stir us to action? Naturally, Subaru's entire body trembled from anxiety and tension. But a slight warm sensation to his elbow drove all that away, for Rem's fingers, touching Subaru's arm, were the spark that lit the borrowed courage within him. Subaru inhaled. In a single breath, he said, the card I'm playing is the time and place where the white whale will show up.